May I welcome members and officers to the hybrid meeting of the Education Overview and Scrutiny Committee. This meeting is able to be viewed live by members of the press and public today. Therefore, may I welcome anyone that may be watching remotely. A recording of this meeting will be made available on the Council's webcasting and YouTube channels after the meeting is concluded, should anyone else wish to view it. To confirm, as a Council, we welcome the use of Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm that I have not received any notifications or requests to use Welsh today. Therefore, the meeting will be conducted in English only. May I remind members to refrain from using the chat facility and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you wish to speak. Please could you also keep your microphones muted when not talking, so there aren't any interruptions encountered. May I also remind members that as per the statutory guidance made under Section 4 of the Local Government Wales Measure 2011 and our formally adopted hybrid meeting policy, any member attending a meeting remotely must be able to be seen and heard by members and officers who are attending the meeting, as well as by members of the public viewing the meeting. So can I ask that you all please use your cameras for the duration of the meeting. Moving on to the agenda, could Jade, our Democratic Services Officer, confirm if we've received any apologies, please?
Thanks, Chair. No apologies that I'm aware of.
I've had apologies from Councillor Clark. He's got the dreaded lurgy and has joined a few meetings online, but he's unable this morning due to him being unwell. So that takes us to agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Could I ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they have any declarations of interest? Councillor Bess isn't online yet, so Councillor Cowles.
Thank you, Chair. Personal interest, I've got a brother that attends Aberystwyth School, and I'm a governor on Blaenavon Heritage School and Aberystwyth Schools as well. Thank you.
Thank you. John Cunningham.
Governor for St Albans.
Thank you. Victoria Holer.
Parent Governor for Yscol Panteg.
Thank you. Councillor Janet Jones.
I've got a grandson attending Aberystwyth Comp, and I'm a governor at Blaenavon Heritage School, Chair.
Thank you. Myself, I'm on the Prue Management Board. I've got a grandson at YGG and 3 great-grandchildren at the Blenheim Road and Coedwiga Federated School. Councillor Simon's not here yet. He is... Oh, apologies, Nick. Councillor Simon?
No, I haven't got any.
Thank you. Councillor Tu, I don't see. Councillor Collett Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a governor at Nant Cadin School, and I've also got a grandchild at Cwmbran High.
Thank you. Councillor David Thomas.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm a governor at Llantarnam Community Primary School, and I've got 2 children that attend there and a child that attends Crossy Cilliog Comp.
Thank you. Councillor Watkins.
I'm a governor at Our Lady of the Angels Primary School and Cwmbran High School.
Thank you for that. That takes us to agenda item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of December 2024. Just to remind members, these minutes relate to the report we received on Torvine School Improvement Services. Members, do you have anything to raise within the minutes? If not, I'll take them as read and accurate. Thank you very much. They are approved. Action sheet. Geraint, can you give us a quick update on the action sheet, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to let members know that out of the 4 actions on there, three have been completed. 1 is down as in progress, but just before the meeting started, I've received the information for that. So later on today, I'll send that round. So everything will be ticked off the action sheet, Chair.
Brilliant, thank you. Members, can you confirm that you've agreed with the action sheet? Happy to note it? Thank you, that's noted. That takes us to agenda item 5, which is the mid-year review of the work programme. We were expecting John Tushingham, but I can't see him online at the moment. So, Geraint, can you take members through this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. I had a bit of a script ready for the item, but it was based on the fact that we were going to have the Education Senior Leadership Team here, but due to a few unforeseen circumstances, it's not possible today. So obviously, yeah, I'm not sure if Claire's going to be able to answer any questions outside of her area, if there are any, in terms of the information within the pack. So I don't know how members want to play. Was there anything that you wanted to raise around the pack? No? Well, that's a relief then. For myself and Claire. So yeah, are you happy to proceed with the rest of your basket as set out in your vision in the summer? Yeah. Oh, that's,
All agreed, we're happy to take the basket as read?
Yeah.
Oh, John, you've just come onto screen. Welcome this morning.
Apologies, Chair.
Have you got anything to raise with regard to Agenda Item 5?
No, nothing from my side, Chair. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Nothing from your side. So everything's good to go in terms of the next item around NEETs, is it, John?
We may have a conversation about that in light of the consultation that's going on at the moment, but that's with Jason at the moment. So we'll come to you outside of the meeting if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. We'll note that. It's entirely up to you as well, John. Whether, if you want to leave once this item's finished, we brought it forward. We usually have it at the end of the meeting. We brought it forward so that once it was dealt with, any officers who weren't involved in the substantive item, they could leave if they wish. So it's up to you, John.
I'll stay for a little while if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
John Cunningham has commented on your face, I think, your lack of beard that you had, John. So, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cunningham.
Jane.
Sorry, in light of the fact that there's going to be a conversation about that, obviously that needs to happen, would it be better then if we swap the next two around, or is attendance and exclusion, does that need to be in May for some reason?
No. They are both the topics for the next two meetings, and
yeah.
We were just having a conversation if they were up to date and we were able to take them. So.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but there's obviously going to be a conversation about the needs.
We'll be informed. Yeah.
If we just allow the process to see through, obviously I'll pick it up with John and Andrew outside the meeting, and if there's a conversation to be had, we can move things around. So obviously we could speak to Andrew and Andy Rothwell as well, and if there's potential, if for whatever reason we can't hold a meeting on a particular item, we've done it in the past. I mean, something's cropped up and we. For timing reasons or whatever, we can't have that item. We've then had a conversation and maybe brought something that was further along forward. So probably best not to go into too much information at the moment. But yeah, we can. If obviously I'll deal with the chair, John and Andrew, and I'm sure we'll.
We'll have a conversation once somebody else has had the conversation and we're aware of the facts.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So that takes... John, you haven't got any further comment on that? No? Okay.
No,
takes us to agenda item 6 then, which is the additional learning needs, ALN transformation. The purpose of this report is to provide an overview of the provision for learners within additional learning needs, or ALN, in Torfaen, and outline the next steps for consideration. The report will outline policy, practice and provision in relation to the ALN transformation. May I welcome, we are a bit thin on the ground this morning, but we've got quality rather than quantity. So may I welcome the head of Learning and Achievement, Claire, hang on, my lines haven't gone through the absentees. Claire Williams, the head of ALN, Inclusion and Wellbeing, and Charlotte Dickens, who we met at our last meeting. So welcome both. As I say, we have quality, not quantity this morning, so may I take this opportunity to thank the young people also of the base, the Pupil Referral Unit and Crown Bridge School for their views regarding ALN, which was really appreciated by all members and officers of the committee when formulating the questions today. So thank you very much, Crown Bridge and the crew. On behalf of the committee, may I also thank the head teachers, staff and pupils of Nantcelyn Primary School for our very informative recent visit, which has proved very useful in preparing for today's meeting. May I ask officers if they could provide, I think we're going straight to questions if you're happy, unless you want to give a brief overview of the report. Claire? We're happy to go straight to the question. Everybody happy to go straight to the question? Thank you. So, may I invite members and officers? As per the agreed order, there might be a few absentees, so we'll fit others in as we go through it. So, question 1 is mine first. And it's referring to 3.3 in the report. And my question is, does the LA have the required capacity to manage the additional duties placed upon it by the ALN Code Wales 2021, and such as supporting learners from 0 to 3 and post-16, holding more statutory plans and funding independent specialist post-16 institutions? Well, have we got the resource there to deal with all the new?
I think the answer to that is we are meeting our statutory responsibilities, but it's fair to say that that is a stretch for the team to be able to do that currently. So the staffing structure is under review. So just to update, there will be an advert posted imminently now. So a recent post has been vacant since the end of October. And that post initially went out to advert for a secondment, but we were unable to recruit into the post. So a job evaluation has been undertaken, and that post has been reframed as an ALN inclusion and wellbeing advisor. The slight delay, I think, has actually been helpful because being, 6 months into post now has allowed me to sort of assess the lay of the land and consult with schools, with head teachers, through pupil voice activities as well, to understand what the needs are. So there will be further reviews to the staffing structure because, as you rightly point out, capacity is limited in order to meet all of those roles. They are being met, but we certainly could add capacity. And the other option that we're looking at is through grant funding, for example, to add capacity through short-term secondments, because some of the things that we need to do are task and finish in terms of setting up processes which can then run sustainably. So obviously I need to see what the grant offer looks like first before those posts could go out.
No, but Claire and I and the team, it is ongoingly and under review. We're actually meeting as a team tomorrow to look at the 0 to 3 post sites.
All right. Question 2. Any supplementary from anyone? No. Question 2 is Councillor Carroll's.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to paragraph 4.1, it states the ALN strategy was developed with families and professionals to clearly set out our approach to identifying and supporting our learners with additional learning needs who may be vulnerable. My question is, how were the families and professionals selected to take part in this approach? Thank you.
I probably find that question difficult to answer, honestly, having not been in post when the original strategy was devised. I would imagine, though, that some of the information that Charlotte shared last week about how families how family engagement takes place would have contributed to that. And also, there is an annual survey with head teachers and with schools, which obviously would take the viewpoint of professionals. But I struggle to provide more detail at this stage, but I could go back and find out more information about the consultation that took place to devise the strategy.
That's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Question 3, which is Councillor Jones. Councillor Janet Jones.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to paragraph 4.2. We will have services that will place learner and families at the centre and which are joined up, inclusive, easy to access, close to home and adapt to meet individual needs. All 3 primary schools with specialist provision listed in paragraph 4.16 are located in Cwmbran. In terms of the close to home element, were schools in the north of the borough considered?
In terms, sorry, were they considered in terms of special?
Of having a specialist unit or a specialist element in any of the North Torfaen schools? I know there's an ALN at Abersacan, but there's not. That's not in the primary provision.
Yes.
So I'd like some.
Yeah, so as you said, there is a learning resource space in Abersacan. At the moment, our specialist placement requests are being considered, and obviously part of what I need to do is look at our forward projection of need and whether there is a need for, further specialist placements. So historically, I guess, again, it's difficult for me to comment on what was considered at that point. All I can really talk about is what we will be considering moving forward, and that will come as a result of analysing those requests that we have in front of us right now, but also working with Charlotte and the early years team and the education psychology team. We are trying to devise a strategy for forward projecting need, beyond the next year, and a longer term projection of need. So that consideration, I think, would need to be taken into account as part of that piece of work that we're trying to do, in looking at, for example, referrals that are coming through to our ASD officer at the moment is showing an increase in need. And lots of those children are in early years and foundation phase, so we have to think ahead to what will happen when those children are at secondary school. So that's an example, and geographically we'd have to take that into account as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Janet. Takes us to question 4, and that's Councillor Watkins.
Thank you. Relating to 4.2 still, it says our vision states that we want all children and young people to feel included and valued. How are we monitoring this?
That's a really good question. We have, in terms of, if I start with exclusions, because that is something that is being monitored really closely in the local authority, we have wider group meetings as an education leadership team, and there is a heat map of schools which we've talked about in previous scrutiny, where we monitor exclusions, we monitor use of modified days, we look at attendance, amongst lots of other things. The information that feeds into that comes from, for example, exclusions meetings that happen monthly with the ALN manager and the lead educational psychologist, and also one of the educational psychology team, Dr. Julie Casey. She links up with every secondary school and she does termly exclusions. They're more like clinics than meetings, really, where they analyse the data in depth. So that is being really closely monitored. The modified day piece of work that we've talked about at scrutiny before also is about making sure that we are inclusive, and that modified days are regularly reviewed, and that children are not left on a modified timetable for a long period of time. So there's a tight process around that. In terms of the wider inclusion agenda, the 4.1, 4.2 and so on lists for you what the current ALN strategy sets out. That is under review, so I've included for you the current vision and wording, but we are working with partners in the EAS to review this and incorporate it into an overarching teaching and learning strategy. So, for context, there is a teaching and learning strategy that exists already that the EAS has published for all schools, but that is generic around pedagogy and signposts schools to professional learning. What we are trying to do is provide a Torvine context to that. So, for example, we would reference ALN processes, possibly as an appendix to that strategy, but what we want to clearly signpost throughout is that inclusive practice should be at the heart. So we want to pad that out, if you like, with some examples, with some case studies of what good inclusive practice looks like at a universal level, what targeted could look like. And that will need to be in a phased rollout, because we want to launch this for September. Phase 1 might include some case studies from school with a learning resource base and mainstream school, and then over the next year we can add layers of that. So this won't be a standalone document moving forward. It'll be part and parcel of our teaching and learning strategy, because we're trying to instill the message in schools that ALN is not different to good teaching and learning. And obviously working alongside Charlotte's team, We would also like to incorporate some examples of good inclusive early years practice. I note the discussion that happened about transitions last week. So that would be a really good example of a case study that could go into the teaching and learning strategy, which is about how do you start being, how do you start really good inclusive practice as soon as the child is admitted to the school.
So, sorry, just to clarify, so you quite confident that once you achieve that you manage to get that rollout, that will make ALN and the ALN students feel more included in that process?
I also think that there's some work to be done in how we gauge pupil voice around how they feel about how included they are better. So one of the things I'm trying to do with our Evaluation and Improvement Officer is create an ALN data dashboard, because as you can imagine, there are so many data streams that you could be analysing when you look at ALN, and we have all of that information, but what we're trying to do is create a more streamlined platform, so at a click of a button I can access the data that I need, for example. Another piece of data that's really important though is pupil voice, and you can't access that necessarily through statistics, can you? So when we bring on board the new ALN Inclusion and Behaviour Advisor, I think it's looking at how that person's role and developing seconded roles can be gauging pupil voice more. So when we're trying to analyse outcomes for learners and whether we've made progress on good outcomes for learners, at the moment I don't think that we gather pupil voice enough to be able to assess that. So that's a plan moving forward.
Okay, that's good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. And emails such as the one we've had from the Prue and Crown Bridge also help in saying how young people are feeling. And
Yes, and I'm also trying to visit as many schools and settings as I can. I sit on the management committee at the Prue. I did learning walks at the Prue last week. So whilst there might not be formal channels as such yet for gathering and engaging these views, it is happening informally, and for me it's about just creating a process that captures that in a formal way, in the same way that we have a head teacher survey, for example. It's finding the right way and working with our pupil participation officer, the gentleman who did the consultation exercise with the children at the Prue, and how we can just join services up better that we've already got.
takes us to question 5. Councillor David Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to 4.4 to 4.6 of the report. What specific steps are being taken to integrate the ALN strategy into the overarching teaching and learning strategy? And how will this integration support Torfaen schools in developing inclusive practices? Also, are there any risks attached to the integrating the strategy?
Okay, I'll try and remember the steps. So it was how, the what it will look like, and risks, yeah? And if I go off track, please, I might just ask you to repeat the question. So in terms of how, Andy Rothwell and I met with EAS this week, actually, and the ALN Head Teacher Strategy Group has been identified as the vehicle, if you like, for delivering this. So as I said, we're not starting from scratch. There is already a teaching and learning strategy that exists that schools will be familiar with. What we're aiming to do is not rewrite that strategy. We're aiming to add some context to it. So if there is a section around relational pedagogy and what good relationships looks like in schools, for example, there will be signposts in that strategy at the moment to professional learning that schools could access, reading that schools could access. What we're looking to do then is say, here's an example of what that looks like in Torfaen. This is what a good one looks like, and this is how that school did it, and this is how they've made it sustainable. So that's the how, and then, as I said, it's using the head teacher groups that we already have. So we've talked about the ALN Head Teacher Strategy Group as being the group that does the work, if you like, but we've also got a head teacher strategy group alongside that could act as that consultation. So we're floating those ideas through that group. I guess the risks is that it won't make any difference. So we've got to make sure that we promote this and we work with our schools effectively to help them see the value in this. So there is a head teacher meeting next week, and the EAS are preparing some slides for us already so that we can advertise this to head teachers and, you know, promote the value of this piece of work. I actually think, you know, having in a different life when I was a head teacher myself, I found that teaching and learning strategy really beneficial, really helpful to have some overarching generic examples of what good practice and pedagogy look like. It would have been even more helpful to have had some local examples. So I think it's about how we communicate this to our schools and how we promote it, and also then at a local authority level, how we help all of our teams understand what it's for. Because not everybody in the team will have a teaching background, so it's helping them understand how they can signpost people to the teaching and learning strategy. The other risk is that we still need to be really clear about what the processes look like for referral around ALN, which is why I'm suggesting we have appendices to this teaching and learning strategy, which clearly sets out what happens when things go beyond mainstream need. So that will still exist.
Can you just remind me, you've used the terminology twice of pedagogy. Now, can you just remind me what it means? I was told long ago, but I forgot.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but basically it's about good teaching and learning. It's about how you, how teachers in the classroom meet the needs of the children in front of them and adapt their teaching styles depending on the needs of the children. And it can also extend to the classroom environment, the resources that teachers use. So it's about their day-to-day practice in teaching.
Thank you, Chair. My question is in relation to minute 4.7. I'd just like to know how many schools or staff have received trauma-informed school supervision or training support?
I haven't got the answer to that question off the top of my head, but I can find that out because a lot of that support will have been run by the EP service or sometimes through our outreach team, but I can get the data. I don't have it off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
The next question is question 7, and this Councillor Janet Jones.
Thank you, Chair. My next question relates to paragraph 4.8. With Caerphilly potentially leaving the EAS arrangements as part of middle tier review, how might this affect CENCOM?
My understanding is that won't affect CENCOM because that's a different, it's a different organisation. So CENCOM is a regional service that isn't linked to the middle tier review. So I line manage Roger Thurbeck, who is the head of CENCOM, and attended a meeting with him in early January where he presented to the regional directors, and there is a commitment from all of the regional directors to CENCOM, because obviously CENCOM provides a service over and above in terms of visual impairment, DDEF, and the speech and language and communication service. So local authorities, are committed to that service, because if that service regionally did not exist, the onus of responsibility would fall to the local authority to be providing that specialist service. So I don't believe that will have an impact.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Question 8 is Victoria Holler. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My question is in relation to 4.10. So, in 4.10 you state that the referrals for an outreach have trebled since the pandemic. Are you seeing any trends locally or nationally to suggest that this will plateau or decrease?
That's another really good question, and I think it relates back to my earlier point about how I've been tasked with devising a methodology for forecasting future need, which is difficult because one doesn't exist nationally. But it is a really good point, and so some of the conversations we've been having at the ALN team is how do we do that? We can look at immediate requests and referrals and project for a year, 18 months, But this kind of data, I think, is really helpful because, yes, we are seeing trends, particularly around ASD, diagnosis of ASD, and then social emotional behavioural difficulties. Sometimes the two are conflated. So that future projection of need, as you said, is, I suppose it is a bit of a crystal ball exercise, but if we can see that outreach referrals are trebling over time, if we were to assume that that trend would continue, that we would look at, right, have we got the right amount of staff in, for example, in the outreach team? How many of those referrals, how many schools make up those referrals? I have got that data underneath that. Is it the same school that's referring? Is it the same cluster of schools, for example? So we can look geographically, we can look at need. The outreach team, they are keeping up with all of the referrals, but obviously their capacity is becoming more stretched. So when I talked about the review of the staffing structure, that is also something that we need to look at, the capacity in the outreach team. They have struggled to recruit a Welsh medium specialist. They did, and then that person got offered a job somewhere else. So that's another aspect that we need to look at is recruiting and trying to expand the capacity of that team. It doesn't mean that they're not providing support to schools, but they're probably providing shorter bursts of support. So whereas they might have gone in for an extended period of time, the amount of time that they can spend with schools is being reduced so that they can meet everybody's referral request.
Apologies. Question 9, Councillor Dave Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And staying on 4.10 of the report, with the significant increase in referrals to the outreach team, what strategies are in place to manage this demand, particularly for social, emotional and behavioural difficulties and emotionally based school non-attendance?
Okay, I think I see those as two different things. So I think in terms of the social and emotional behaviour, as I've said, it's looking at the capacity of the outreach team to be able to support the schools with the volume of requests that's coming through. I've also met in the last few weeks with Autism in Education Trust, because in trying to take some learning from other local authorities in Monmouthshire, they've developed a really robust package of professional learning for schools and for staff around autism, because alongside outreach we do have an ASD support officer, and as I've said, whilst that's not strictly social and emotional behavioural difficulties, often the two issues are overlapping. So it's about trying to bolster support, not just through an outreach team, but through empowering schools to be able to meet need, because the reality is those referrals are increasing and schools are experiencing more and more pupils receiving a diagnosis. So the Autism in Education Trust package, if you like, is about professional learning, but you have to have someone in post to be able to deliver that professional learning. So that is why we're looking at increasing capacity in the team. In terms of emotionally based school avoidance, this is, this isn't just a Torfaen issue, this is a national issue. So this was discussed at ADU recently, and directors have asked Public Health Wales for, the Health Board rather, for some further guidance from Welsh Government, because emotionally based school avoidance is it's a fairly new phenomenon. We used to have children who would refused to attend school or could not attend school pre-pandemic, but post-pandemic we're seeing an increase in that need, and I think this is about us working really closely with our Education Welfare Service colleagues as well, to try to understand the reasons behind school non-attendance. The Educational Psychology Service can support schools where this issue is presenting, and I know that they do, so they can provide schools with advice and support. I think the issue around EBSA at the moment is it's not unregulated, but there's not set guidance on the best way forward. So you have lots of external organisations who are supporting schools, and we need to make sure that we've got a clear and consistent message about how we are going to approach this issue. so that we're not giving conflicting advice and support to schools.
I just wondered, with the emotionally based school non-attendance, are we able to say yet if there are specific reasons, if there are more of one reason or another reason, or is it very spread across the board?
I think it's very contextual to each individual. So a number of the cases that I've experienced and been involved in, it can range from some trauma that's happened in the home to sometimes an incident that is a one-off incident that has happened at home or in school. And then there can be wider reasons which are linked to perhaps a medical diagnosis that the child has. So it very much varies. I think this is why it is difficult to produce national guidance. However, there is guidance in the it's called Belonging Engagement, it's attendance guidance. Apologies, I can't remember the wording of the actual document, but it's the revised attendance guidance that Welsh Government put out about 2 years ago now. And that has advice and support for schools around EBSA, and very much the emphasis is on working with families, trying to understand reasons why, providing wellbeing support to encourage pupils back into school rather than a punitive route. And this is why I'm saying we need to work with education welfare, because it isn't just an additional learning needs issue. It's wider than that.
Thank you. Everybody else okay with that? Takes us to question 10, which is my question, and I've got question 11. So question 10 is referring to 411. Schools appear in favour of the recent ALN funding formula changes. However, we've picked up that some schools are uncertain regarding the specific allocation for their learning resource bases, as it forms part of several budgets. Are there any plans to provide more clarity to these schools?
Yes, that formula is being reviewed currently. So the ALN Head Teacher Strategy Group, I chair that meeting once every half term. Charlotte sits on that group as well. And the piece of work that we're actually working on this academic year and in readiness for the next financial year is a review of the learning resource-based funding formula, because I think it's fair to say that it's not consistent across our schools with learning resource bases at the moment. So the mainstream ALN funding formula, as you know, was reviewed this financial year, and the resource-based funding formula is currently being reviewed. That piece of work is also happening alongside the development of a local authority partnership agreement with schools with learning resource bases. We have one in draft, and the group have already examined that twice and have agreed in principle on many of the aspects of it. The aspects that are yet to be agreed now are dependent on funding. So the stage that we've got to with that is we have come up with some principles, and with the agreement that some financial modelling will be done now to look at the implications of using the principles that we've agreed with. Clearly, as we're at the point in the year where we're approaching the end of the financial year, the finance team are quite busy. So that piece of work will be picked up again now in March when the financial models have been done, and then we can have a more informed conversation about what the implications could be. And if they're not right, then we need to go back to the principles and review.
I think my concern was, and John Cunningham will identify with this, years ago we used to have a separate education finance team, and then subsequently been taken into centre, and I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding on what pot goes with what pot and what child, and I think there's more clarification needed on what income is coming in and where it's coming from and what is to be used.
The learning resource base pot, if you like, for the schools is delegated to them to manage. And what we've experienced in looking at it as a group is that some schools are funding it possibly on a per pupil basis. Some schools are looking at staffing, and if schools have got a high level of teaching staff in their learning resource bases and others are using HLTAs or TAs, then that's where discrepancies can happen, because schools can go into a deficit in their budget depending on how they staff in their learning resource base. So that is why we're trying to look at creating a set of principles for all that would be the same, so that schools can manage that budget more effectively, knowing how they are meant to be staffing and using the money that's allocated to them.
And the next question is also mine and funding. It's relating to 411. Sorry. Is there any disadvantage to not holding the 200k contingency fund? I remember when we brought it in. So, for example, new cases, emergencies, or children moving schools. So it was the 200k contingency.
Obviously, this was, you know, an element of the funding formula review that was out. This is why it was put out to consultation. I would say that this was probably the biggest bone of contention when we were reviewing this funding formula, which is slightly ironic given the numbers, the amount of funding involved, considering the whole pot. But I do understand it. I do understand the need for that and the discussion. In terms of the consultation, we only received 2 responses that suggested that schools wanted to keep that contingency fund. So that's a marker in the sand for you in terms of the strength of feeling that came through the consultation. We have had that discussion, and I take your point. When I did an analysis, though, of how that pot has been used, there was less than 100,000 at that point in time when I did this review had actually been allocated out of that £200,000 contingency fund for a handful of schools. However, every time that decision had to be made, that included a panel of people making that decision. And the average amount being allocated to a school out of that contingency panel was about £4,500. So that £200,000 now goes back into the pot to be shared equally amongst everybody, which seems to me more equitable than some schools getting a small share. And if you do the maths, I think they probably end up with more than £4,500 if you share £200,000 between all the schools. So yes, it is tricky if you get children in year, but 5% of the school budget should be allocated to ALN as well. So schools should be, you know, allocating some of their own delegated funding towards ALN.
That takes us to question 12, and it's Councillor David Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And staying on funding with 4.11 of the report, how will the new ALN mainstream funding formula with its weighted elements ensure equitable distribution of resources to schools, especially considering the smoothing strategy for implementation?
The principles of the new funding formula are designed to make it more equitable. So my understanding of the previous funding formula was that there was categories of funding around complex and highly complex need, which was fairly subjective criteria. The new funding formula is based on pupil numbers, so pupil numbers are pupil numbers, and you know, so that is equitable, dependent on the size of the school. The deprivation element, again, was discussed in terms of the measure that would be used, and the rationale for using the WIM data, again, was about equity, because a free school meal measure is quite a crude measure of deprivation and only captures at a moment in time, according to the PLASC data, whereas the WIM data will take into account if you like, where the child is coming from. It is based on their postcode. So a school's community could be made up of children that come from lots of different areas geographically. And so the WIM data, I think, is more equitable. And then in terms of ALN, again, that is about trying to make it more equitable. It's taken away the subjective nature of whether a child is complex or highly complex. If they have an IDP, they have ALN, and the school will get funding for it. An IDP is a statutory document. There should be no subjectivity about it because we've had to follow a statutory process to put that statutory document in place. Sorry, I think there was another part to your question, but I'm not sure if I answered the second part. And again, so the smoothing strategy, the reason that was decided upon was because until we had the IDP count in January, January 24 now according to PLASC, we could only provide basic financial models. So what we're trying to avoid is swing in funding for any school. And so the 50% smoothing element is there to mitigate against any, to put in any school in any financial instability.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Thomas. You've got a supplementary.
Yeah, thank you.
Jay?
Yeah, sorry, I just want to get it clear in my mind. So obviously the funding now is going to be on pupil numbers. And I understand that, yes, things like high levels of need, that can be quite subjective. But so the process needs to be followed to give the child an IDP if they need one. But then once they've got that IDP, do some of those need more financing than others? So the levels of finance would be different at that point?
No, we're not differentiating within, because we wouldn't differentiate in the statutory process between this IDP costs more than that IDP. So there is no differentiation, because I guess that would be taking us back to the system we had before, where we had that LA sort of imposed definition of what is complex, what is highly complex.
Next question is question 13, is Councillor Watkins.
Thank you. Yeah, so are we up to date with IDPs, as this was previously an issue? And is there much variation between the way schools are currently completing these documents?
There have been some delays in the meeting the timescales for the writing of early years IDPs, and I don't know if Charlotte might want to come in on this in a moment. I think that relates back to your very first question, Councillor Seaborn, about capacity in the team. So sometimes those timescales have gone over time in writing those IDPs. What I would say, though, is as a local authority, we have been very proactive in instigating early years IDPs and have been following the ALN code, in the spirit of the code, and identifying that early. That has created, if you like, a capacity issue for us. So those IDPs are being written, but sometimes they're out of time. Charlotte, did you want to say anything on that, or I covered that?
No, I think you've covered that, Claire, and I think, like you said, that's it's ongoing review, really, with our partners in the FIRST team and ALM and the inclusion team. They all represent on our early intervention panel.
I'm doing strictly, and then you answer, okay? Tam.
Sorry. But I think that we are identifying children much earlier as the requirement of the code, that early identification. We are seeing the needs increase. I think it's around allowing that time for early intervention piece of work to happen as well. And I think, like I said, I think we've been quite proactive in meeting that code requirement, but not looking at the capacity within that. But like I say, Claire's reviewing that currently.
And then the second part around how do we know that, the quality assurance piece. We have, in January, we invited a group of ALNCOs. We put out expressions of interest for ALNCOs to join us to do some quality assurance of IDPs. So we dip sampled. We didn't look at everybody's at that stage, but we did a dip sampling exercise to look at the quality that is coming through and look for consistency. And what we've identified out of that process is through the ALNCO forum, we do need to do some further professional learning. The IDPs that we were seeing, they were of quality, but they are variable across schools. We are still in a stage of ALN implementation, and I don't think you can put enough professional learning opportunities on for schools right now to support ALNCOs. What we did then on the 17th of January, there was the IDP count for the new formula. And Tracy Tucker, our ALN manager, has done an analysis of those numbers that are coming through. So where we have seen an increase in IDPs, we will now go in and do some quality assurance. We will pick some schools to go in, and if we've seen more than a 10% swing, for example, in numbers of IDPs, we will go in there. Also, where we've got schools with very low numbers of IDPs, we'll be going in to just cross-reference and check with the school. It's not checking up on schools, it's trying to support them to make sure that we've got this process right. The ALN code moderation group that met with me in January, it was really positive because we talked about what could moderation look like now moving forward. And it's not a one-off, it shouldn't be a one-off annual event where we check some IDPs. We've talked about actually having some learning walks where ALNCOs and perhaps LA staff can be involved in supporting schools if they would like it, to review their internal provisions, looking at IDPs, but also some peer review with the cluster of ALNCOs as well, and having a programme that spans an academic year, not just a one-off, let's look at your IDPs in January event. So it's more developmental as well as moderation.
Okay, the next, sorry, yes, Victoria.
Thank you, Chair. You said you offered out the ALNCOs to offer some of the IDPs. Did you have much uptake from schools or ALNCOs?
Yes, we had nine schools join that process.
Thank you.
Brings us to your next question, Victoria, question 14.
Thank you, Chair. 14. This is in relation to 4.15. With regards to the additional 50 places at Cranbridge School from January 2025, do you anticipate that it will provide enough capacity? And if not, is there a knock-on effect to mainstream schools?
Okay. Most of those places are already full. So we've just had, in January 24th, we had our specialist panel. I can't give you definite numbers yet because there is another panel in March. So what we are doing at the moment is keeping an eye on that need. We have had over 100 requests, and we are currently processing those and working through them. We're at the stage now where some visits need to take place, further visits. So, for example, Bethan Moore, the head teacher of Cranbridge, sits on that panel, and other representatives across lots of schools, and they will be going out and doing some observations around pupils. So, obviously, we have to meet need where there is a demand for specialist placement. So part of the panel process is about assessing what that is, and then assessing what we have, and also with finance officers, trying to medium-term financial plan if further places are required. I know that in scrutiny last week, though, Andrew, spoke to yourselves about how creating more and more specialist places is not always the answer. We also have to look at how we build capacity in our workforce, and how we use our funding to support schools, because we are seeing more and more children coming through, as I said, with the diagnosis of ASD, for example. Not all of those children will go on to require a specialist place. So how do we make sure we work with our schools to give them the tools, the skills, the professional learning, be able to adapt their teaching environments to meet need in mainstream, because that's where the majority of our learners with ALN will be educated.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question was for Councillor Best, because he's not in attendance. I'll ask it for him, and it's relating to 4.22. Question 15. Is there a clear preference for secondary schools in terms of whether they send young people to the PRU or commission their own alternative EOTIS provision? If so, have you received any feedback as to why?
I'm not aware of any specific preferences that have been, made clear or to me. No one's actually said that outright. But what we do have is a Manage Move panel, and that panel is fairly recently established in the last year, and some learning has been taken from a neighbouring local authority. I think that panel is still developing, and I think moving forward we could look to bolster that panel, perhaps with professionals from other service areas as well to support. The idea of that panel is to bring pupils for discussion before we get to the stage of referring elsewhere, or a stage of exclusion, so that it is a proactive and problem-solving forum. The PRU protocol has also changed in the last 6 months. So for this academic year, the turnaround provision has been added, and that's very recently up and running. And we're hoping that schools, you know, over time will engage with that so that the PRU doesn't become a destination for learners, but that it is used as that turnaround to be able to support, assess need, and support schools to receive and reintegrate learners back into mainstream. In our education improvement plan and the ALN plan for the coming year, there is an action for working with head teachers and schools to look at how we can pool our resources, if you like, in alternative provisions, and also not just the commissioning of those, but the quality assurance of them, so everybody's not doing this on their own.
Can I just ask on the education other than at school, how much of a take-up is that?
I think that's probably related to the last question as well, in that in terms of EOTAS provision, you know, we have the PRU as our EOTAS provision, but also schools themselves sometimes commission alternative provisions that they oversee. So it's twofold. It's looking at provisions that the local authority are responsible for and commission, and also working with schools where they are outsourcing. So in primary schools, we're seeing schools developing perhaps their own internal nurture type groups, whereas in secondary schools that might look different, where they are outsourcing and having some alternative providers rather, as well as perhaps having some internal provisions. So it's working with schools to make sure that that's safe and that, you know, all the right processes are in place for commissioning and safeguarding and quality assuring, but also making sure that there is a protocol around how does a child get referred for that, what's the criteria for that, what does it look like, how long does it last for, if that provision is off-site, what does the reintegration plan look like? So that's the piece of work I think we need to do.
I just wonder whether that comes in with a cost.
Yes, it does. And you know, in terms of the delegated budget then for ALN for schools, in the same way that some schools that might set up a nurture classroom would need to use their ALN funding, then the commission of alternative provision would come with a cost, yeah.
Question 16, Councillor Collett-Thomas.
My question refers to paragraph 4.323 and 4.24. With regards to out-of-county provisions, how far away are some placements and what quality assurance arrangements are in place?
In terms of where all of the placements are, again, I think I probably need to go back and get some information. So I know that some of them are in our neighbouring local authorities, some of them may be further away if they're residential care, but, you know, I can get further information on that. In terms of quality assurance, if those places, for example, I've been asked this week to comment on an Estin pre-inspection commentary where that setting is being inspected and we have a learner there, so we're involved in that type of process. We're actually, the ALN team and the educational psychology lead, we are actually visiting a provision in a neighbouring local authority next week. We're going to do a quality assurance process ourselves of that provision. That is an action in our education improvement plan and our ALN team plans to make sure that over the course of the next year we quality assure every provision. But even though a physical QA may not have been done yet in every provision, there is still quality assurance in terms of safeguarding. So the information is sent in terms of safeguarding, DBS checks, and health and safety requirements and so on. But we want to improve that process so those physical visits are done as well.
So can I just check, once you've done the quality assurance check, and obviously it sounds like you intend to go around all the provisions and do that quality assurance check, how often then will it be done in the future for each particular pupil?
I think, obviously, in terms of capacity of the team, anything more than annually would probably be unrealistic. But it's also a regional piece of work that we're considering. So I sit on SUC Inclusion Group because in neighbouring local authorities, we may all be using similar out-of-county provisions. So in terms of strength in numbers and economies of scale, we would look to try to do something regionally. And once that process is up and running and set up, I can come back and report on what that timescale actually looks like.
And you've got the next question, Jane.
Thank you. Yeah, moving on to 4.29. It states there the local authority will review alternative provisions for more complex learners of primary school age. When will this review take place, and will the creation of a primary aged PRU be a possible consideration?
In terms of a primary age PRU, I think back in December, I think John Tushingham's team presented the capital programme, and I think the primary PRU, John will correct me if I'm wrong, is in Band B. But I would need to go back and find information on which stage of the programme the primary PRU is in. In terms of meeting need currently, as you rightly say, we don't have a primary PRU. We have an assessment centre, we have Pontbach Assessment Centre, and at the moment children can go there, and it is meant to be turnaround where it can support to assess need in terms of social and emotional behavioural difficulties, with a view then to children being reintegrated into their mainstream. So it isn't a primary PRU, but we do have an assessment centre process. In terms of the bills, as I said, I haven't got a date I can give you on that, but it is in the longer terms of capital buildings plan.
Takes us to question 18. John Cunningham, please.
Thank you. Before I ask the question, I understand you were fairly new to the role. Can I compliment you on how you put the report together, because it's full of educational speak and the use of acronyms, and you've explained every acronym, which is a great help to me, I must say that. My question then relates to, whether you find it, yes, 4.32. Following the significant decrease seen last year, the number of pupils identified as being on a modified day continuing to decrease during the current academic year. Do you understand that? Shall I read it again? I'll read it again. Following the significant decrease seen last year, are the number of pupils identified as being on a modified day continuing to decrease during the current academic year? I understood it that time.
Yeah, I got it the second time as well. The modified day data is analysed monthly. So the ALN manager and a link inclusion officer analyse that data monthly. And then in the wider group meeting that we have as an education leadership team, we report on that as half-term, and we have the heat map. So what I would say with modified days is they needed to come down because there were too many, and children were sometimes being put on a modified day, and that arrangement was going on for long periods of time. So it was natural that those would come down because of the new protocol. What we discuss in wider group now is that it isn't necessarily a bad thing if a child is on a modified day for a short period of time at the moment. We talked about EBSA earlier, and sometimes children coming into school a little bit later is reducing their anxiety to such a level that they can actually then come into school and attend for the rest of the day. That would be a modified day. So to give you context, it sometimes is used as a strategy to support children where they're having anxiety or well-being about coming to school. So obviously we would like to see those numbers come down, because ideally we want all children in full-time every day. So I don't know if they will come down. I can't forecast that trend. We would hope, because what does happen is at the end of the period of 6 weeks, the link inclusion officer will be checking with the school. Every child who's on a modified day has to have a personal support plan, and if it's not coming to an end, there has to be a very good reason as to why. So I would expect we would see them come down over time, but it's not a bad thing that we still might have some children on them, because sometimes they're used as a supportive strategy.
Thank you. Question 19, Councillor Cowles.
Thank you, Chair. This relates to 4.33 and 4.35 of the report, and it's with regards to the Improving Behaviour in Schools programme. What results are we seeing from this being rolled out, and are we seeing an improving picture in terms of staff well-being?
this IBIS programme was launched via a conference in January last year. So the premise of it, if you like, was launched. And then it's been a pilot project, really, with secondary schools over the last year, led by Dr. Julie Casey. So there is an IBIS network, and secondary schools will send a representative to that IBIS network. What we've talked about as part of the teaching and learning strategy development is how do we link that to IBIS. So what we don't want to do is overload schools and say we've got a strategy for this and a strategy for wellbeing and an IBIS programme, and there's a teaching and learning strategy. So it's trying to reference the IBIS programme throughout that teaching and learning strategy, and Julie Casey is keen to meet with me to talk about the implementation further now of this and bringing primary schools on board. So it's early days in terms of assessing the impact of it. I've attended briefly one of the IBIS network meetings. The people that were participating in that, including the head teacher of the PRU, were very positive about the IBIS modules. But it's a bit like the Autism and Education Trust package I explained to you. IBIS is a programme of professional learning, so it's only as good as the rollout of it in every school. So if it's been delivered to a very small team of people, it's going to have less impact than if it becomes a whole school approach. So that was my reason for thinking we could bring that into the space of the teaching and learning strategy, because what we're really saying is the IBIS programme is about culture, it's about a whole school approach to wellbeing, it's about relationships in a school. And yes, there are some tools and strategies and tricks up your sleeve that it contains, but it's really about that whole school ethos around behaviour, wellbeing and inclusion. In terms of the exclusions, though, it's helpful that Julie Casey is leading the IBIS work, and she's also the person that goes in and does the exclusions meetings with the schools, because she can then reference the IBIS programme, and I've seen some examples of where she said you might want to look at this particular module where there's been this issue in a school. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
I understand that it's still early days with this. Obviously, we're a year down the road, or more than a year now, but it's still being rolled out. Are you able to say when you are hoping to see improvements in the schools with this?
I think it's we've got a primary representative who's come on board now, and my hope would be that we will launch this when we launch the teaching and learning strategy late summer term in readiness for September. We are seeing impact in terms of exclusions, but it's fair to say that in some schools exclusions are decreasing. In other settings we're seeing an increase in exclusion. So it's hard to say that there's that overall pattern and trend across the whole local authority at this stage. And I, all I can say is we will be monitoring that. We're monitoring that data really, really closely.
Okay, question 20, which is Victoria Haller, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is in relation to 4.39 to 4.42, and it is, are the staffing levels for Welsh medium support around educational psychology and ALN within the LA a risk? And have regional discussions included the potential of a pool of resource for Welsh medium support?
In terms of local authority staffing, we are actually quite fortunate in that we do have Welsh speakers in our teams, which isn't the case everywhere. So we do have a Welsh speaker in our EP team, and we have a Welsh speaker in our ALN team, which is helpful. As I said, there are plans to have a Welsh speaker in the outreach team. Unfortunately, that person got pipped at the post, and they were offered a post elsewhere. So in terms of the review of the staffing structure, that obviously is a consideration for me moving forward, how we could bolster our Welsh language support. I'm actually attending an event early March on this Welsh Government event on effective practice in ALN for Welsh medium. So I'm hoping to get some learning from that event in terms of, forward thinking and projection of need and staffing and so on. We are also exploring options around, Welsh medium additional learning needs support and what that could look like in the future. So those conversations are being had as well. And I sit on the Welsh medium cluster So I join those meetings once a term. So I've done one so far, because I've only been here 6 months. But I will go to the next one. Thank you.
It was highlighted in one of the schools we visited that the resources for Welsh medium was, pretty poor. I brought it up with the EAS business plan report, but it's obviously a different issue again with Welsh medium ALN. So there's going to be, an even more consideration given to that resource. And,
yes, and this is why I'm hoping the Welsh Government event will be helpful in terms of just signposting, perhaps to good practice and resources that are out there, because I don't know what I don't know yet in terms of that. The Autism and Education Trust, one of the benefits of that to me is that the core modules of professional learning are also available in Welsh. So that was a huge bonus that training, should we go down that route, will be available bilingually.
That's brilliant, thank you.
Question 21, Councillor Watkins.
I feel this question's been answered by the previous question.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Thomas, question 22.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding paragraph 4.47, are meetings of the various stakeholders groups listed and paragraph 4.47 well attended?
Yes, so the ALN Head Teacher Strategy Group, that is made up of all of the head teachers of schools with learning resource spaces. There is a mainstream representative, head teacher of the Peru, head teacher of Crownbridge, and a Welsh school representative. And I'm just checking I'm saying this right, Faith School representative. I'm going through all the membership in my head and looking at all the people sat on the table. That group is very well attended. And so, again, we've only met twice because it's half term. We've met twice in the autumn term, and our next meeting actually is next week now for the spring term. And to date, I think everybody on that membership list has joined, even if they've had to join virtually. The ALN Co-Forum, that's been very well attended as well. That happens half-termly. In the first forum that I attended, if I'm honest, I wanted to see how it ran, what people's expectations were of it, before trying to sort of shape that into how I think it could be moving forward. So at the last one, I did a survey with ALN COs and asked them lots of questions about where they feel that they have strength, where they feel they need more support, what kind of activities they would like to do, so that ALN Co-Forum, I want to make it so it's not just a meeting where we deliver information, but that actually is an interactive forum. There will be some delivery, but there will be some workshop type sessions where we can consult with ALN COs on some of the documentation that I've mentioned today. So the the Teaching and Learning Strategy, for example, the ALN Co-Forum would be a perfect group, wouldn't it, to be examining some of those case studies, perhaps that are coming in around inclusive practice. That's very well attended. The Learning Resource Base Network, I don't attend that meeting, but that is a network of staff that work in our learning resource bases. That's almost like their cluster network, if you like. But Alison Costa, EDP, is the local authority rep that attends there. Just because of my own capacity, I could just be doing nothing but attending these forums otherwise. The Wellbeing Network that is more at a local authority level, but it also includes external partners. So myself and Alison Costa, EDP, Alison Daly, who's our Healthy Schools officer, the Cynefin team, which is the community psychology team that have rolled out the Gwent Whole School Approach. A member of the EAS Equity and Wellbeing team sits on that Wellbeing Network. And to date, it's been a bit of a problem-solving forum. It's been an opportunity for professionals to bring themes and trends that are coming forward across the local authority in terms of wellbeing. But we've also reviewed the terms and reference of that group recently to how do those messages filter back to schools, and how does the themes and trends that we're discussing there, how does that translate then into some practical strategies and solutions for schools. So an example of that is we're planning a staff wellbeing event in the summer term. So we'll host it at the local authority, and it's a wellbeing marketplace for head teachers. I will launch that with the head teachers in advance to, again, try and get the buy-in, communicate the rationale and the why for it. And it's about helping school leaders to plan their universal to targeted approach to staff wellbeing in their schools. We aim to have stands where we'll have HR, perhaps some of the unions if they would like to be involved. We'll invite lots of partners. Also, local leisure, so that we're trying to advertise benefits around health and wellbeing that employees can access, and some practical strategies around wellbeing. And then the Manage Move panel meets fortnightly. That's always very well attended. I can't think of a school that hasn't attended that unless there's a really good reason, because it's in the interest of the school to attend those meetings where they're discussing where pupils might move to. So yeah, I feel like the consultative groups are really well established here.
Takes us to question 23, which is Councillor Janet Jones.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to paragraph 4.49. Development of a local authority individual development plan, IDP, request consideration tool. What are schools using now, and how will this new tool improve things?
Okay, so under Chapter 12 of the ALN Code, schools can refer to the local authority for local authority IDP. The Welsh Government are undertaking a review of the ALN legislation at the moment, because they want to gauge how practitioners are finding their ability to interpret that. Because I think it's fair to say across Wales it is quite a confusing piece of legislation. So that review is happening. So at the moment, schools would have a checklist, when they're putting requests forward. This is just about trying to support schools further with some greater exemplification of the sorts of evidence that they might need in order to put, forward a successful request. And again, this comes back to working with the ALNCO Forum around when would it be appropriate to request a local authority IDP. I think is quite grey at the moment, a grey area, not just in Torfaen, we're all at the stage of trying to interpret the legislation. So this is just trying to put some meat on the bones to support schools with understanding what that needs to look like. And that will be done with the head teacher strategy group.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Question 24 is Councillor Colette Thomas.
Chair, I'm referring to paragraph 4.49. Establish a learning resource-based partnership agreement, including a review of specialist provision funding formula. Will this funding formula sit outside the main ALN funding formula for schools?
Yes, so I think I sort of covered this off a little bit earlier. Yes, they're two separate formulas. Yeah.
Thank you. And question 25 was Councillor Beth, so I'll read that for him. It relates to 4.50. Some schools have suggested that the EduKey system is being underutilised and therefore not reaching its full potential for ALN tracking and support. Would you agree that with this view, and if so, are there plans to encourage wider use of the EduKey?
I would agree, and we discussed this with ALNCOs. So my understanding is EduKey has been purchased for schools. I think it's fair to say there's been a period of disruption in terms of strategic leadership of ALN over the last year. So where probably that implementation plan stalled for a short period of time, that needs to be picked back up. I have direct experience in a head teacher role of being an EduKey guinea pig and experiencing the rollout of that. And whenever you roll out a new system, you're going to have teething problems. And I think it's being realistic that something like EduKey we'll need a phased approach over 2 to possibly 3 years to get it right in schools. So we talked in the ALN co-moderation event, actually, we went off on a bit of a tangent, about what an implementation plan for Educare could look like. There are some schools that are using it and using it really well, and they're really keen and chomping at the bit to champion that and act as, you know, forerunners, if you like, for the other schools. So I've got some keen and willing able ALN co's. And also what we're doing is exploring the funding for that and what that could look like to support schools to roll that out, because it will benefit schools, and I've seen the benefit of it once we got over the pain of implementing it. I've seen the benefit of it from a school perspective and for the local authority in terms of information sharing and making systems and processes quicker, tighter, access to information for panel requests and so on. So there is a plan to roll it out. Yeah.
You know what I'm going to ask anyway, don't you? I read 4.50 and I've gone all through it. There's no reference in there to what a Educare is, because I don't know. It's obviously a package of some description.
It is a good question. Yeah, it is a package. So it is a package basically where schools can store their information electronically, so the child's IDP, but also notes of minutes, EP reports, medical reports. It's like a repository really where you can put all of that information, but it can be accessed electronically, and information can be shared securely with the local authority and across. So it's a data information sharing system essentially.
This is a similar package to My Concern that it could relate. My Concern will tell you everything, apparently.
Yes, similar. Yeah, similar but different. Similar but different purpose, I suppose. So, when I was head teacher, we had Educare and My Concern. So we used Educare for our additional learning needs, and we used My Concern for our safeguarding and behaviour. So it would be up to schools if they were using My Concern, if that's how they wanted to continue using it. But you can use my Educare for recording safeguarding concerns as well. So that would be very much the autonomy of the school. But yeah, similar but different purposes.
No further questions on that? I think if the local authorities purchased it, then, you know, it's silly not to be using it as well if it's recommended, and it was, it was brought up to elected members on their visit. So yeah. Question 24, Councillor Thomas. 26. Forgetting my crossing out here. So John Cunningham, please.
Anything on the report, but several schools and early years settings have commented that parents often apply for places at those with specific provisions, or nurseries that they think will improve their chances of getting into certain schools. How are we managing parental expectations around this?
From an early years perspective, early years officers and across the system, so, health visiting will promote and talk about childcare if they're eligible for the 2-year-old childcare, or when they're eligible for their education place. So they will just give guidance of direct to Torvine website or family information website, and how they can apply for admissions as well. So it's that broad, what the process is. So we don't, advertise particular nurseries. They just, it's about that your child is eligible for the 3-year-old place, and this is where you can apply through the admissions process. So we just promote the system and the process that's in place. But we are aware, like, on our visits, it was brought up, there is a community, sometimes parents, sort of expectation, and also promoting with admissions as well, the process by putting posters up in all those contact areas where parents will be gathering, whether that's clinics or schools, of the cut-off times for application. So, we are promoting the system, but we are aware that it is a challenge.
And from a local authority perspective, we wouldn't be recommending one school or setting over another, and I've been really clear with head teachers in meetings as well and ALNCOs that neither should they, because all schools should be able to meet children's needs in mainstream. So I'm not saying we haven't encountered parents suggesting that, but we would always say to that parent that, you know, any school should be able to meet their child's need. Obviously, parents have a choice as well, and you know, it's the same with early years, isn't it? That parents can choose within reason if there's space in their school of choice. But we certainly wouldn't be promoting one school over another.
I think the question was managing parents' expectations rather than, you know, our facility. If they got an older child in one school in an ASD base or something, and they got a second child, it's you know, they would take them to the nursery or the primary school to get them into a secondary provision, or the other way around, those early years. So it was a parental how we manage that parental expectation. So thanks. You'll be pleased to hear is our final question. And you've done really well this morning, so thank you very much for that. So, question 27 is the number of children wearing nappies, and this was meant for the Director of Education who commented on our last meeting. The number of children wearing nappies has come up as an issue at several of the committees recently, with recent primary school visits. This presents a safeguarding issue as it requires 2 members of staff to change nappies, which also then impacts on teaching capacity. Would you like to provide an update around how we're managing this issue going forward? Might be not one for you, Claire, but it is an issue that's concerning everyone at the moment.
I think obviously I will need to take that back, and we'll need to have those discussions. I know that the head teacher and HR group are looking at some guidance, which I think they looked at previously, but then didn't proceed with, around intimate care. I've looked at that guidance and have said that I'm happy to sit and join that group, you know, to look at that, which at the moment sets out sort of responsibilities around what schools might and could and should do, but could be strengthened with some advice around what parents could do as well. And it is a really fine balancing act. I know that Andrew said this last week, didn't he? There is a really fine balancing act about meeting the needs of the children as well and looking after their well-being in settings, but also working with our early years colleagues to support parents. We are meeting tomorrow, Charlotte, aren't we, to talk about early years and ALN processes. And we've already talked about toileting and how can we improve communication, for example, to parents and share messages and support for parents, and how can our non-maintained settings and schools share similar messages. So, you know, once schools have got their admission lists, most schools would do some sort of intake preparation meeting. We've talked about transitions and what information can be shared at those meetings to signpost parents and support them with this issue. I know that transitions was talked about in depth last week in terms of early years, but Charlotte and I have had conversations about how our worlds cross over in terms of that. What does a good transition look like? And part of a good transition is what does school readiness mean, and how do we communicate that to parents? So I think it's about support.
And just to add to members following our scrutiny last week, our health colleagues have proposed piloting a toileting group in the north of the borough. So we're going to start that group up in the north and pilot it for parents. There's been an identified need with some parents that asked for it, and that's why we've targeted the north. You know, to roll those sort of preventative messages out and start thinking about that school readiness in terms of access to education. So that's something that would be interesting to look at and see what the uptake is like, and the promotional material, obviously. And we talked about PRI with schools as well, because there are some good materials that we can give to schools to access. You know, when they have their pre-intake day in terms of coming into nursery education, they can start talking about in the summer term, ready for September. So it's about that information to give to parents as well.
Is that a question we asked ourselves last week, I think, when the officers left, you know, about the lack of take-up on early years? Is some children have the lack of potty training or whatever, and some parents might be a little bit apprehensive about sending their children to early years because of that lack of training. I don't know, it's a moot point, I suppose.
In terms of early years, we don't see that impact. It's when they're transitioning into their education settings, so into their nursery or into the reception. I think, you know, just talking to childcare providers where children are accessing childcare, there appears to be that there's a reliance on the setting to do that with their child, which they're very supportive of doing, but also we need that parent engagement to continue that as well in the home. So it's about, again, that reinforcing key messages and providing parents with those tools.
I also think it's about understanding the reasons behind as well. You know, I mentioned earlier about the increase in ASD referrals and caseload, and sometimes children might be waiting for an assessment, and sometimes we don't always know, you know, the reasons behind issues. So it's very hard to have a blanket or a line in the sand, isn't there? Because there can be multiple reasons why a child isn't at that stage of development. So it's about trying to understand, but also trying to share messages and consistent messages about what support is out there for parents to help their children to be ready for school.
And obviously, some children will never need that because they have, you know, their needs. So, but it is a cause for concern. I think it might be on the head teacher's agenda after we've spoken to a few of them. So, and can I just say, you know, parenting, I think Sure Start did a huge piece of work on this when Sure Start was first introduced. Whether or not it's continuing on or not, perhaps Charlotte can mention.
Yeah, and that's part of our early years offer, and the Flying Start element is the parenting support, family support. You know, so we've got universal offers where there's drop-in, we've got our research evidence targeted programmes, and we also work very closely with our parenting lead as well that sits within Families First. Yeah, so you know, that support's there. And in terms of, Claire was talking about their approach for schools. Well, you know, we do the circle security and those programmes for our childcare settings, so that there's that continuous support, and embedding the person-centred practice approach as well, because that is around the individual child's needs.
The press release that was taken out of our meeting last week has caused a lot of comments, so I haven't read them yet myself, so I look forward to reading them. So, can I thank you as officers both?
Thank you. Yeah, just quickly, Charlotte, you mentioned then about the children being school ready or ready for school. Is there a specific list of skills that considers a child to be ready for school, or is it sort of a more general?
No, that's been a discussion across the early years forum, but also with colleagues in our different teams. So Public Health Wales have undertaken a survey, which I think the report was due to be published January. So I think from that next step is to determine what readiness looks like for parents, for early years practitioners and for other organisations. We haven't had those yet. So I think that's a review that will be ongoing. But I think I acknowledge that there does need to be some definition of that school readiness.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, isn't it? Because it is a term that I've heard used for years about children being school ready. And I thought, oh, it may change slightly from authority to authority, but I expected something much firmer around it. So yeah, it would be interesting to see what they come up with.
Absolutely, and because it does give our expectations, especially our transition into education. But yeah, it's been a discussion, a topic for a very long time.
I think as well that it's probably changed over time as well, hasn't it? And then when various programmes and initiatives have been launched, perhaps definitions look different. You know, what a child of 3 might have developmentally, the stage they might have been at before the pandemic, for example, could look very different for a child who went to school at 3 in 2021, for example. So, as Charlotte said, we have got that public health piece of work being done. but also, you know, schools have, and in Curriculum for Wales, we've got those progression steps which are broad descriptions of expectations, and also for schools to be working with their parents around what does school readiness look like. So coming back to toileting, I think it's helping parents understand the impact on their child's education if they're not toilet trained, if they're able to be, you know, so that parents understand what actually happens and what that looks like in terms of learning, and trying to meet people in the middle and provide the support and signposts then.
Another question from Councillor Jones.
Could this information, working with schools, be put into the school prospectus? You know, we all have prospectus when your child's going to school. That could be something that could be highlighted, the expectations of the school on parents.
I would need to check this, but I think having something around toileting, you have to have something in your school prospectus around that, probably around facilities anyway. So I would imagine that most schools have got something in their prospectus around that. Charlotte, do you want to?
And it's about us engaging as well with the individual schools and sort of the resource capacity they have. For instance, given that Helen as an example, they utilising space at Cumberland ICC for their community engagement. They're looking at setting a group up on a Tuesday afternoon, which is family driven by the school. So we've offered to go in as different officers, that health visitor can go in one week to talk to parents, and a midwife, so there's also those connections as well. And we also reach out in terms of school newsletters and offer attendance as well for intake and events that school holds as well. But yeah, so it's around, again, schools knowing that we are available to be able to come out to such events.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. It's certainly a hot topic at the moment, and I look forward to reading the comments. And I believe working parents is another thing, isn't it? I mean, years ago, mums stayed at home till their children went to school, and now there's a need for them to go to work straight, within weeks of childbirth. So, yeah, it's a big issue. So that leaves me to thank Claire and Charlotte for their time and contributions to the meeting this morning. You are now prepared to leave the meeting. Thank you very much while we discuss our recommendations, unless there's anything you'd like to round up with. But, you did really well, so thank you very much. So, thank you. Members, can I please remind you that the meeting is still in formal proceedings and still being webcast. May I remind members what's being asked of the Scrutiny Committee to consider when coming up with their recommendations this morning. Members have been invited to assess whether the ALN provision in place is sufficient in order to meet current and future levels of demand, and provide recommendations to the Executive Member for Children, Families and Education on areas for improvement or development in our strategic approach to ALN. I'll ask members if they have any specific recommendations that they would like to make on the report.
Yeah, Chair, I didn't think that my question, and I'm not sure what Liam thinks about it, with the provision of all the schools on question 3 about provision for north of the borough. I thought that was a little bit vague, and I'd still like, to sort of recommend that consideration is given for a provision north of the borough, anything from Pontypool, Pontywen and it up. I think there is a need, knowing the increased numbers of pupils with additional learning needs and PRUs. I think it's important that this is considered.
Yeah, Liam agrees with you. I think most members agree that it's about equality. Okay, that's one. Shall we go around the table? John, do you have any specific recommendations? Jane? Yep.
Nothing other than that one that comes to suggestions.
Colette?
Just the one about the EduQ. put rolling that out, please?
Yeah.
Victoria?
Yes, same as the one about EduKey. And as I can only read my writing for now, so that's it.
We're looking to provide more Welsh language resources, particularly for
Yeah.
ALN. Yeah. John, Dave, did you have any comments? Councillor Thomas?
Nothing specific, Chair.
Okay.
Chair, about recruitment seems to be difficult at the moment for certain areas in the staffing process.
Yeah.
And that was a concern, being as we had to revise the application or the presentation for new member of staff, and they had no recruitment as well. So I think recruitment is a major concern as well.
Thank you, Janet. I think we need to pick up John Cunningh's question on question 18 about analysing whether or not there's decreasing numbers in the modified day.
Yeah.
Changes.
That's really something she'd need a crystal ball for, wouldn't it? You know?
Oh, yeah.
It's not a question that you could answer definitively.
Yeah, yeah. And the impact that we were reliant on funding, I think that was going back to sort of question 9, about we were reliant on funding for a lot of this provision. And what if the gaps that could leave us if there was no funding available? So maybe it's a pressure on putting Welsh Government to provide additional funding for the pressure it will have on schools, on their school budgets.
Thank you, Janet. The other one was the promoting of the staff well-being. I thought we needed to welcome the promotion of staff well-being. This is a comment that can be, I think, because they're actually doing that, aren't they, on 4.47.
Chair, we need to perhaps have a report or assessment of Crown Bridge, whether we will have enough places there, because they were doing an assessment, I think,
Yeah.
of need. It'd be useful to know it.
Gareth, do you want to whip through what what you picked up as well?
Sorry, can I just... Okay, that's okay. Just trying to jump in. Do we want one on a recommendation about PRU for primary age children, or more provision for primary age children? I know you said that the PRU for primary is in Band B, so it is sort of on the plans, but do we want some form of recommendation about that?
I think that's what Janet said for the north of the borough.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I think they're different recommendations. I completely agree that the north of the borough needs more provision. Absolutely, I think it's a different recommendation about primary, because primary is across the whole of the borough, isn't it?
Primary was...
Yes, it is, yeah.
Was the issue, because Aberystwyth has a provision.
Yeah, Aberystwyth's got the secondary school, which has got the ALN provision, but there is no primary in the borough. And seeing the increase in primary children with needs, I think, is important. So that's what my question was, Chair.
I was just going to say, in terms of a recommendation specifically around a primary PRU, I'm not sure what recommendation you'd want to put forward in light of the fact that it's already something that they clearly want to do, because it's on the programme, isn't it? And it's under Band B. So I don't know if what would you want to sort of like add to what's already in place, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, but I suppose so we can't recommend that it gets moved to Band A, and also that's only the PRU. I think there's a greater need in primary than just for a PRU. So I think either we need to extend Janet's recommendation, so it's not definitely focus on the north. I'm not saying to remove that at all, but more provision, because I don't think that the assessment centre at Main to Primary is nearly enough for primary school children. So I definitely think there's a recommendation there somewhere.
I think I've got it.
You've got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, I've been able to understand my handwriting now. So, on question 4, when we talked about the monitoring, and it was brought up that there is no formal monitoring process of people voice. I wonder if that could be a recommendation that the local authority input a formal monitoring process to get the pupil voice and how they feel included in their ALM provisions or settings. Thank you.
Sorry, on the, haven't explained the Aduki package, and it says in the question there's, it's been, some schools are advocating that it's not be, it's being underutilised. Make sure you ask the question, I don't know if she answered fully, make sure you ask the question, is it providing the proper service then? I mean, if it's a package, it's like the one I raised about my concern. That's a little bit like an internal Google, that if you want to know about the pupil's concern, blah, 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 you use my concern. What does this do, and is it worthwhile?
Yeah. I think that was the point. It's really worthwhile, but there's not the take-up of it, so we have to promote the take-up of it. Why would it be
promoted then?
Yeah, so that's a...
Why or might be?
Yeah.
Or how is it being promoted?
How is Eduki being promoted? And
I think from talking to some of the schools, the ones who are using it most and seeing benefits from it, they don't think that some of the schools are aware of how many benefits there are to using it. So, and obviously, like Claire said, she's new in post, and there hasn't been somebody in her position for a little while, so she obviously wants to sort of push that, So it's so it's just sort of sharing the benefits, of why more schools, probably should be taking advantage of the system that they, obviously paid for.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. In terms of any recommendations I picked out, you've already covered them. The only thing I was going to say, there's the one action for question 6. Obviously, Councillor Thomas asked for the number of schools.
I got a question mark on there. Yeah.
So I'll add that to the action sheet.
Yeah.
What was...
Out of county provision.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, asterisks that one as well.
Okay, yeah, put both of those on the action sheet. I think that's it, unless any other members have got any further recommendations.
Okay. Right in front of me, and you can't see me. Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, Chair, I got like a rather long-winded one for the expansion of Crownbridge School. I've just put it in the chat bar rather than just taking up bare time.
It's okay, Councillor Thomas. Can you, obviously we say at the start of the meeting not to use the chat bar. Can you just mention? Can you just verbally?
Yeah. So 1 second. Yeah, let me just I've written it down now.
Because obviously not all members in the meeting have got access to the chat bar as well.
Yeah, that's fine. So it was just about the expansion of Crownbridge School. So establish a structured review process for the expansion project, including regular capacity checks and community feedback sessions. This could involve setting up a task force that includes council members, school staff and parents to monitor the utilisation of new spaces and assessing ongoing needs. The council could also consider developing a dynamic forecasting model for the ALN demand to ensure future expansions are data-driven and proactive. I told you it was long-winded.
It's about your coverage. I think we've heard that one.
And some of that as well, obviously, was picked up by Claire in the meeting.
Yes.
She said that they were reviewing it, and they were
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, did you picked up all the recommendations?
Yeah.
All right. Nothing further from anyone? Thank you very much. That's brilliant. So, we've got the date of next meeting, which is the 20th of March. This year is going by so quickly.
Yeah.
To close in the meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, because I thought the scrutiny activity was in two parts, and the first part was to assess whether the provision was sufficient to meet current and future levels of demand. And I wasn't sure that we'd answered that part.
With the question on Crown Bridge was asked by Councillor Connor. What do you want to add to it then?
I'm not sure at the moment that it is sufficient to meet the current and I think future levels is hard to say. We've already said crystal ball, and it does sound like they're putting a lot of things in place for future demand, but I don't think it's sufficient to meet current demand.
No, well, we can say that. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
On with that as well is that they said they've had 100 requests for placements already.
Yeah,
there's only 50 placements.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a huge double of requests for actual places.
Yeah, I would support that, Chair. I think I don't think there's enough being done.
No.
So I would endorse that.
Can we combine all those 3 points on with Colette's Crown Bridge thing? That might be it. Yeah.
They were looking at it, but yeah, just a reassurance.
Yeah, but I think, you know, you're quite right, but I think that's specifically looking at Crown Bridge, so that's a special school. This is all ALN, and we know that most of them are in mainstream. So it is that, but it's bigger than that.
I would agree with as far as assessing the provision. I don't think it's totally in place yet, and I think there's certainly issues on space in some places of and dealing with the different types of ALN and mainstream, which can be similar children. Okay. So our date of our next meeting is 20th of March. As chair of the committee, may I thank members and officers for their ongoing support and contributions to our meeting. That I pay particular attention as this was Claire's first meeting in leading the officer feedback, so they did very well. Thank you very much. And I now close the meeting.
Thanks, Chair. Bye.